Like many teenagers of my generation, I read the Hunger Games trilogy as it was being published in real time. And while I enjoyed the trilogy, I read the whole thing. I went to see the movies when they came out with my friends. I think I was maybe a touch past the age that I would have had to be for these books to become really foundational for me, in part because I'd been reading voraciously for a decade or so before this point and read quite a bit of sci-fi and fantasy. So while these books were entertaining and I enjoyed them, they weren't revolutionary for me. Pardon the pun. That being said, I did read the 2 prequels this January for my annual Goodreads Choice Awards winners video, and I was really pleasantly surprised by those. I expected them to be fine, good even, but considering it had been so long since I read the original trilogy, I didn't really remember that many of the details, just the broader strokes. I wasn't that emotionally invested in the world or the characters. The series really hadn't been emblematic of my childhood in any particular way. I was really kind of shocked not only by how much I appreciated the thematic explorations that Suzanne Collins was doing through this work, but also through the characterization and how emotionally invested I became, and so quickly. I cried several times reading both of the prequels. I was very emotionally invested. I was destroyed emotionally at times. Reading both of the prequels honestly reminded me so much of the experience of reading as a child or a preteen. Just that total immersion, the rest of the world disappears, no thoughts about anything other than the world that you're reading about. You just disappear into the pages and come up for air when you're done. And I don't get that feeling that much these days as an adult. We all have a million things on our minds, and it's really hard to fully let go and fully lose yourself in a story. And so I really loved the experience of reading the prequels. I gave both of them 5 stars. I asked all of you if I should reread the original trilogy, and the unanimous opinion in the comments was, yes, please read them immediately. They're even better than the prequels. Run, don't walk. Post haste. What are you doing still reading these comments and not immediately reading the books? And I heard you loud and clear. So here I am reading the original trilogy. I am really intrigued to see how I react to these books as an adult. I have a feeling that something that I noticed about the prequels is going to continue with the original trilogy, which is mostly that now that I'm in my 30s, reading about children fighting to the death, it lands a little differently than it did when I was the same age as the characters. I don't think the tragedy hit me nearly as hard as a teenager as it does now that I'm a full-grown adult and can see just how young 12 to 18-year-olds are. Feel free to read these along with me and let me know your reactions and thoughts as we go along in the comments. And once I get to the end, once I've read all 3 books and have reviewed each individually and then the trilogy as a whole, I'm going to reevaluate my thoughts on the prequels and how I feel they hold up in the context of the original trilogy, because I did review them a little bit in a vacuum. Now, I might not be as image obsessed as the people of the Capitol in Pan Am, but I do enjoy fashion and style. I enjoy putting together a cohesive look and presenting myself in a way that makes me feel good in my own skin. And an absolutely vital piece of that puzzle is this video's sponsor, Ana Luisa. Ana Luisa is my go-to brand for affordable yet high quality jewelry. If you've been here for a while, then you know that I wear my Ana Luisa pieces literally every day in every single video. I get asked where I get my jewelry from all the time, and the answer is Ana Luisa. I love that Ana Luisa creates so many unique pieces, but also variations on a theme, which makes it so easy to create a cohesive stack. If you, like me, have multiple piercings or like to wear more than one necklace or bracelet or ring at a time, Ana Luisa makes it so easy to mix and match and pair pieces together that make it look like you put way more time and effort into your look than you actually did. Whether you're looking for those staple pieces that you can wear day in, day out, you can wear in the shower, you can sleep in them, wear them to the gym, and they'll stay looking brand new for years to come. Or if you're looking for a gift for a loved one, Ana Luisa is the perfect place to go. Ana Luisa uses certified factories and transparent supply chains to create luxury quality pieces without the luxury markup. They're also both carbon neutral and climate neutral certified. Ana Luisa's products are designed to be life-proof, tarnish-free, water-resistant, and hypoallergenic, and each piece comes with a 2-year warranty. In my 3rd piercings, I have these teeny tiny twisted huggy hoops. They are so comfortable I forget I'm wearing them, and they are my go-to favorite for day to day. I think I have worn these every single day for at least a full year at this point, if not longer. So you know they last. In my 2nd piercings, I have the Rocks small earrings. These are also a huggy earring, and I love how modern and unique these look, even though they're still very understated and simple. I've had these earrings for at least 2 or 3 years now, if not longer, and they've held up so beautifully. And then in my first piercings, I have a brand new pair of earrings that I'm very excited about. The Ash double hoop earrings. Again, these are a huggy, and of course they go so well with my rocks hoops. I feel like it looks like I put way more effort and intentionality into picking out earrings that go perfectly together when really it was zero effort, and they are so comfortable I forget I'm wearing them. They have a bit more visual impact while still being very understated and elegant and minimal, and just work in so many different contexts with so many different outfits, which make them perfect for daily wear. I'm also layering two brand new necklaces today. The first is the letter necklace, a simple gold initial necklace. This is such a classic. I got my first simple initial necklace, I think when I was about 10 or 11. I had a silver one back then. I used to be much more into silver, but even though I still have that initial necklace, I find that I never wear it because, again, I'm more into gold these days. And when I saw this necklace on the website, I just knew I had to get it. It reminded me so much of my childhood necklace, and I wore that thing day in, day out for years because it's a staple. So easy to layer with other necklaces and just add a little bit of personalization to your stack. And then I'm also wearing the Pebble gold pendant necklace. I love this necklace so much. There's something so interesting about the design. While it is very minimal and simple and elegant, it also has this sort of unexpected shape and is quite eye-catching, a bit of a statement because of its size. It has this visual weight to it that makes it look super expensive, and I love that it both feels modern and timeless. I highly recommend you get some Ana Luisa pieces for yourself to build your own daily wear stacks. I have been wearing them for years and they have never let me down. You can use the link in my description box or this QR code to shop. Thank you again so much to Ana Luisa for sponsoring this video. And now, without further ado, I'm gonna go start The Hunger Games. It has been almost 20 years since I read this for the first time. This is gonna be really interesting. I'm halfway through The Hunger Games and tabbing away, and I'm really enjoying it. It's definitely immersive and fast-paced and interesting and exciting, and I'm remembering why it swept the world and became so popular with young teen readers and why it continues to be super popular to this day. Definitely a lot of it is coming back to me now that I'm reading it. I'm remembering a lot of the characters, and as I meet various characters, I'm sort of having vague inklings of where their storyline is about to go, but it's all still pretty hazy in my memory. So there are still some aspects of the story that I 100% totally forgot that are surprising me. So that's kind of fun as well. I'm also definitely feeling old reading it, having Katniss be 16 and reading it now and reading her reactions to things and the way that she is interacting with various people and with her team at the Capitol and with her fellow tribute for District 12, PETA. There's just so many moments where I think, yeah, that's a 16-year-old right there. That's accurate. And does that make it kind of frustrating sometimes to read about her? Yeah, there are definitely moments where I'm kind of yelling in my brain at Katniss to be more self-aware and also to think about more than one possible option for why people might be doing a variety of things. But you know, she's 16, so this is her experience. And while she has had to mature very quickly, in some ways she's been parentified. She had to step up and take care of her mother and sister after the death of her father because her mother was so deep in grief and depression for so long and wasn't able to go back to work. There is this strength and resilience and independence that she has, but she also, because she was forced to grow up at age 11 and be the adult, be the breadwinner for her family, she also kind of skipped over some of her, especially emotional development. Some of her emotional intelligence is not quite there. And to be fair, she didn't have time to develop that. She was busy keeping her family alive, and that's understandable. I just feel like I have a lot more insight into her character and who she is and why she is the way she is than I did at 16 when I really didn't have the context for that and didn't have any lived experience to kind of put behind it. I do think Katniss is an interesting character and I enjoy following her, but I will say that she is a little frustrating. She's a little annoying at times. She's very quick to anger and to judgment and to assume the worst of the people around her in a way that is, again, realistic and relatable for a 16-year-old, but also a little frustrating to read again and again. I also, like I predicted, am finding it much more emotional and heartbreaking to contend with the younger characters, Katniss's little sister Prim and the youngest tribute in this Hunger Games, Rue, being 12, and how little that really is, how young that is. And I do remember now that I'm getting to, I mean, we haven't had much from Rue. The chapter I finished to get to the halfway point was chapter 13, and she just sort of ran into Rue within the arena during the Hunger Games. So we haven't had much interaction between them before this point, just some shared glances, and she's aware of Rue and noticed how much Rue reminded her of her little sister. But otherwise, they haven't really interacted yet. But just the few mentions of Rue, it's reminding me that she was my favorite part of this book as a teen reading it. She was the character I was most emotionally invested in. She was the character that made me the most emotional reading the book the first time. And I remember now seeing the movie and the actress who played Rue doing an amazing job and just sobbing at the theater with, reckoning with the fact that this little, sweet, pure, innocent 12-year-old girl was thrown into this battle to the death, contending with the horror of that. I remember being very emotionally impacted by that. And I think that was coming from sort of a big sister energy place, even though I am not a big sister. I always wanted to be a big sister. Some of you sometimes tell me that I feel like I'm your big sister on the internet, and that really warms my heart. Honestly, it's like the best thing ever. But I think I had big sister energy when I read it the first time, and that's where that was coming from. Now I feel like I have more mom energy. Like I have more of a maternal instinct or aunt energy because I'm an aunt. It's a different flavor, and it's even more disturbing and upsetting. I also really continue to appreciate, this is something that I talked about when I reviewed the prequels in my Goodreads video, but I really appreciate the social commentary. It is pretty straightforward and not super subtle, but considering it's aimed at a younger audience, I think that makes sense to just be pretty upfront with the commentary. And not all of it is totally explicitly stated. There are quite a few details about the differences between life in the districts versus life in the capital and life in the various districts and even different classes within districts. We're given the chance to notice those differences and how they manifest themselves and how they impact the citizens and whether we think they're fair or not, without the book necessarily outright stating it every single time. So there is still a certain subtlety, even if some of the bigger themes are definitely being just told to us up front. Again, I think that makes sense for a YA novel. So I try to be fair when I'm reading books aimed at a younger audience and not expect them to handle themes in the way that I would expect an adult novel aimed at an adult audience to do. I do also think it's interesting to be reading this after reading the prequels and getting a bit of an origin story for Effie Trinket and for Hamish Abernathy and for President Snow. Seeing them with that context makes them much more rich, complex characters, and I enjoy that. I appreciate that. I feel like I saw a few comments on my Goodreads video where I reviewed the prequels that some people felt that the prequels kind of rewrote history a little bit or tried to change the characterization for some of these characters. And I'm not sure I totally agree with that as of yet. I feel like so far everything I'm reading feels very in line with how they're portrayed in the prequels. Of course, it was decades before and people change quite a bit over their lifetime. But also, it's one thing to read a book from the perspective of President Snow or from the perspective of Hamish Abernathy, especially when they were teenagers. And it's something very different to read a book from the perspective of a different teenager who is viewing them as middle-aged or older men and perceiving them through her own frame of reference, through her own worldview. And like I already said, Katniss is pretty quick to judgment and quick to assume intentions behind things that aren't necessarily always backed by all that much evidence. Not only do I think that people change extremely, vastly over the course of a lifetime. And that can explain some of the difference. But also, like I said, it's very different to be in the head of a character, knowing what they're thinking and feeling and how that is motivating them to do and say certain things. And it's very different to know a character only through someone else's eyes who doesn't know them very well and is making a lot of assumptions about what they think and what they want and why they're doing what they're doing. I do find some of the writing around the grief, her loss of her father, and how painful that was for her as an 11-year-old, and then how much harder that was, how compounded that was by the really dysfunctional extended grief and depression that sent their mother into, and having to try to survive without either parent. As she says, it was one thing to lose her father, but it really ultimately felt like she lost both of her parents that day. And I find that really emotional. And there are a couple passages to do with her dad, including talking about how they go to the forest together, and the Mockingjays loved her father's bright, clear voice and would always patiently wait for him to finish singing and then repeat back what he's saying to them. She hasn't felt able emotionally to sing to the Mockingjays in the forest since losing her dad because it's just too sad. So some of those passages are really, again, hitting in a different way. When I read this at 16, I hadn't lost a parent, so it was one thing to feel empathy for her loss with being able to draw on my own experiences, like losing my grandmother when I was around the same age that Katniss was losing her dad, and I was very close to my grandma, but, not the same thing. And now reading it, having motherly feelings toward Katniss and Prim and Rue and all the other, young characters, but also having experienced the loss of a parent and how painful that is, and imagining instead of going through that at 32, going through that at 11, and then, having a mother who is so bowled over by grief that you have to essentially step up and parent your own sibling. And it's just, there's so many layers of tragedy to that, and I'm finding it very emotional to read, clearly, as I'm struggling to hold in my tears. So that's a thing that's happening. Also, that reminds me of the moment where the baker, Peeta's father, visits Katniss in the visitation time before they're taken away to go to the capital for the Hunger Games. And he seems to struggle to say anything. He's just sort of sitting there in silence, having brought her some cookies, and then is just awkwardly sitting there. And then before he goes, just saying that he'll protect or keep an eye out for the little girl, meaning Prim. And that really got to me. For whatever reason, that had me crying harder than I expected to in that moment. Just the idea that the whole community and the way that passage is written, semi-spoilers, but of course, even if you haven't read this, I assume that you know that the protagonist is in the Hunger Games. The circumstances of her becoming one of the two tributes for her district were so emotional and so immersive and intense. It draws you in, and the way that passage is written and the emotion of it, and then also the silent resistance and solidarity of the people of District 12, that just hit me on such a different level. I feel like as a kid, I read that section and I just sort of ran through it full speed ahead, wanted to know what would happen next, and didn't really pause to feel the weight of that moment. And reading it now, it was very impactful, and I thought really well put together, really well done. I also feel like lines like "May the odds be ever in your favor" are so iconic at this point that it's really fun to come across them and to remember how, at one point they were just some of the words on the page in this book and no one knew about them, and now they have become such an iconic quote that almost everyone is aware of, even if they haven't read the books and haven't seen the movies. I also feel like I'm appreciating, while the writing style is quite straightforward and simple, I'm really appreciating the craft that Suzanne Collins is employing to tell the story. There are several moments where she chooses something that you might not expect to deliver a deeper emotional impact, or that she words something in a way, uses repetition, not overusing it, but uses repetition to really drive home an idea, or to sort of bring us in this feeling, this cyclical thought pattern that a character might be going through, to really ramp up the tension and the emotion of the moment, to make us feel how the character is feeling. And everything is very restrained. It's quite straightforward. It's not super lyrical writing by any means, but there is a craft to it that is very well put together. And I feel like I keep noticing little things that I really appreciate about the choices that Collins made about how to structure certain things and when to give us certain information. And I appreciate that. I feel like that takes skill, and I'm calling it out and appreciating that skill. I don't have a huge amount to share spoiler-wise, but there was one reveal that I completely blocked from my memory. Did not remember at all. So I want to take a second to talk about that, because I was shocked and couldn't believe that I didn't remember that happened. But otherwise, those are my thoughts on the first half. Hopefully I'm not missing anything too significant. Spoilers for the first half of the first book of the Hunger Games trilogy. Starting now. Skip these if you don't want spoilers. I'm about to start. Are you ready? Okay, so the reveal that I did not remember at all was that Peeta, who is her fellow District 12 tribute, is working with the careers, working with the tributes from some of the, first couple districts who see being chosen for the Hunger Games as an honor and train their whole lives to be more likely to win, and are generally seen by all the people in all the districts as, brown-nosing to the capital and traitors to the districts, essentially, and cruel and despicable. And especially because Peeta presented himself to be so friendly and kind, that was Katniss's whole experience with him, but she kept feeling suspicious of his motivations. And then the way that they framed him for sponsors was telling everyone that he's in love with Katniss, which he seems to actually be. And my memory is that he actually does like Katniss, unless I just made that up, or maybe the movies added that love triangle aspect to it. But I feel like I remember him actually having a crush on Katniss. But then he is working with the careers, heavily implied that he murders another one of the tributes within Katniss's hearing. And I was shocked by that reveal. Obviously, you're meant to be shocked by it. I couldn't believe that I didn't remember that that happened. And I assume that there's a reason and there's a longer plan, and that he is trying to work with them to get on their good side, get their trust, so that he can protect Katniss from them, or so that he has a better chance of surviving, or whatever it may be. But it's pretty messed up. It's pretty messed up. And I did not remember it at all. So I finished that chapter when it's revealed that one of the voices is Peeta's voice. And I just sat there with my mouth hanging open for a couple minutes catching flies because I truly couldn't believe it. I did not remember that at all. So Suzanne Collins got me, even though I already read this. She's shocking me again with all of these twists and turns. So anyway, I also feel like I remember that Peeta and Katniss both survive, but obviously that's not supposed to be how the Hunger Games works. There's only supposed to be one winner. And I can't remember if it's because they frame them as these star-crossed lovers, if they end up being the two remaining, that the Capitol decides to allow them to both be winners because all the citizens of the Capitol are excited to have, a love story, or if something else happens. I honestly can't remember where it goes. I do remember what happens to Rue, and I'm not emotionally prepared. That's it. Those are the spoilers. Those are my thoughts on the first half of the Hunger Games. I'm going to go finish it because I'm excited. I want to keep reading. I'm also getting ready to be sad, and it's already surprising me with things that I totally forgot happened. So I imagine I'll get more of that, and that's exciting too. So that's what I'm going to do. I'll be back when I finish it. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you're reading this for the first time or doing a reread, how was the first half of book one for you? Was it everything you remembered? Is it just as immersive and fast-paced and exciting and intriguing as you remembered it to be? Are you picking up on things that you didn't notice the first time? I would love to read your thoughts, and I'll be back soon. Chewie and I are here, Yoda's over there, out of frame, to talk about the Hunger Games, because I finished it this morning and Chewie is gone. Wow. What can I say? There was so much to say. I definitely had some thoughts reading this as an adult. I can definitely feel that it landed differently for me as an adult, even though I don't really remember most of my reactions and feelings about the book when I originally read it, because it's too long ago now. I can still feel that my interpretation of it has more depth and breadth than it would have when I was 15 or 16 reading it for the first time, which one would hope, right? There are a lot of things I want to talk about, but I feel like so many of those things are spoilers, so I feel like the vast majority of my discussion of the second half half, and honestly the entire book, are going to be spoilery, but I think the structure of the Hunger Games is so well done, and it's really, not only is it drawing on historical precedents of things like gladiators and turning violence into a state-sponsored public spectacle entertainment that not only distracted the public from their quality of life and other issues in their life, but also reinforced who has the power and what can happen to you if the powerful decide to punish you in some way. A very strong demonstration of the power that the state holds, and also a way to instill fear in the population, in the entire population, and not even just in the districts, but also in the capital. The idea of you must follow our rules, you must be a good citizen, you must do what we say because we are capable of this level of calculated cruelty, public executions, and you will not be exempt from that kind of punishment. I think we see less of it in this book, but it's something that I noticed about the prequels that I really liked, is also talking about how the Hunger Games are perceived by those who are watching at home, and the ways that it's both desensitizing but also this shared social experience, this bonding experience, and something that everyone is mandated to participate in or to watch, but also that it simultaneously, by its very nature, is created to drive people apart and to create distrust and resentment and anger and division amongst the regular citizens. The Hunger Games are a form of control, and they are the government of Pan Am's attempt to force the population into a state of dysfunction and disconnection to keep them from ever teaming up for another rebellion, because the original rebellion caused so much destruction and pain and suffering. And Pan Am, of course, the capital, has no interest in allowing yet another revolution, another rebellion. And so they have formulated the Hunger Games, along with many other rules and regulations, to control the population, to instill fear, and also to create this division, because not only are the tributes fighting children from other districts and creating this automatic team sport feeling, this competition of wanting your district to win and therefore all of the other districts to lose, and glorifying or sort of reveling in the gruesome deaths of children from other districts and the dehumanization of those kids because they're not from your district, but also within districts, because you have two tributes from each district. And in the games, the idea is that there's only one winner. That means that even if the tribute from District 6, for example, doesn't kill their fellow District 6 tribute, the idea is that only one can survive and the other will be dead. So even if your district has the winning tribute, they come home, they are the victor, and they live in luxury in a separate enclave with everything they've ever wanted for the rest of their life, never going hungry, never needing to lift a finger. But also anyone who loved or knew the other tribute who died is going to harbor that resentment, and that creates that division and the distrust and the feeling within the districts themselves that you can never really truly make deep connections with other people within the district, because you never know if you will be in the arena fighting against them, and how do you kill them, how do you look them in the eye and execute them if you grew up with them. And that's something that Katniss is processing and trying to deal with in the beginning of the book, when she realizes that her fellow tribute is someone who did her a good turn when she really needed it, who did her a favor that essentially saved her and her little sister and her mother's lives. And she feels that she owes him so much, is grappling constantly with this struggle of how will I kill him if it comes to that. And that's part of the intention behind the structure of these games. And I think that they are very well ideated. Collins did a really good job of creating something that not only leans on the spectacle of something like a gladiator fight and public executions and the idea of those being a form of entertainment, but also reality TV and telling a narrative and tying that into propaganda. There are just so many layers to it. And while I feel that it's written simply and straightforwardly enough for teenagers to pick up on a lot of those things, I do think that having lived more life and having read hundreds more books since then over many years, that I have a much deeper understanding of all these various things, and I have more historical context and more lived experience in the world and on and on. And I think that that really deepens the impact here. And I think that's great. I think a book that is written for teens, that is accessible for teens, but also has enough depth and substance to be worth a reread in general, let alone worth a reread 15 plus years later as an adult, and to still have more to give and have more depth and richness in its themes is really quite a difficult thing to achieve. And Collins, I believe, did that with this book. I also really appreciate that this book, it sort of gestures at it more than really exploring it, but I think it's a really interesting idea of engaging with why the Hunger Games has a victor at all, especially if it's framed as the Hunger Games exist to punish the districts for the rebellion. If you're punishing them, why let anyone win? Why not have them all die? Why not have someone from the Capitol in there who always gets to win, who kills everyone else if it's punishment? I won't spoil anything around that for you if you haven't read it, but one of the characters at one point says they need a victor, giving the districts the sense of false hope that they could be the victor, that they could win out, that if they're ruthless enough, that if they're able to kill all the other tributes, if they were in the arena, they could win, they could live a life of luxury. It's almost bribing them into buying into the system of desensitization in the hope that they and their loved ones will live a life of comfort because they are living in most of the districts in very poor conditions. Also putting on this front of the system works, aren't we so benevolent? We are willing to give a beautiful mansion and a lifelong supply of anything that this victor wants, forever, because we are so kind, and we really are just doing this from the kindness of our hearts to remind the districts of where we came from and to give them a chance at this amazing life. Ties into that propaganda of this paternalistic figure in the president and of the Capitol. We might have to sacrifice some of you, but we will reward you for your efforts and for buying fully into the system and supporting the system and keeping it going. It also makes it more compelling to watch, more emotionally intense for the viewers at home, hoping and wondering if the person they're invested in will survive, and knowing it's possible for someone to survive rather than it just being a bloodbath and knowing that everyone will die at the end of the day. It's not just an execution, it's a competition, and that adds that extra layer of complexity emotionally to it and gives the tributes a reason to compete and to try to win rather than uniting together and trying to fight the system. Again, their entire purpose with the Hunger Games is to divide and conquer and to remove any sense of solidarity. And having a single victor does that so effectively. You also have the case of the survivors, whoever the victor is each year, gets to live in luxury, but they also live with survivor's guilt. They also live with the trauma of what they went through for the rest of their life. And that weakens their relationships and weakens their community time after time. Either everyone in your community who goes to the arena never comes back, or they do come back, and when they do come back, they are meant to be a hero, but they are fundamentally changed by this experience. And that, yet again, erodes community from the inside out. And I just think it's so clever. All the parts of it are so clever. Oh, I was also going to say something else I can say without spoilers. I really appreciate, I think I mentioned this in the halfway update, that one thing I was struggling with Katniss, even though it makes sense for her character and also her age, was that she was very quick to judge other people and very quick to make assumptions about other people's experiences and their intentions. And I really appreciated that over the course of the book, she starts to reckon with that a bit. She comes to realize that not all of her assumptions were true and that sometimes she jumped to conclusions too quickly. And maybe there's more complexity and nuance to some of these people she's met and some of these situations than she realized. And some of those realizations were used to explore even further the class wars that the Capitol is trying to impose on the districts, that they are keeping them in this scarcity mindset, even though they have this amazing advanced technology and they have all this luxury, so much wealth and excess in the Capitol. The districts are kept in this forced state of scarcity, poverty, and even those who are doing better relatively in the districts also are not doing as well nearly anywhere close to the people in the Capitol, your average citizen of the Capitol. And again, they're sort of kept fighting each other, where Katniss, living in the poorer area of District 12, is looking at people like Peeta, who live in town and are, part of the shopkeeper class, as having so much and being soft and never having to go to bed hungry and never having to struggle. And over the course of her time with Peeta, she learns more about his life and realizes that actually their lives are not as different as she thought. So I really appreciated that, both for growth for Katniss as a character, the development of her as a character, but also for a deeper exploration, expansion of the themes and the world building and giving us that richness. I also really loved seeing Katniss make connections with other characters and open up a little and be vulnerable enough to admit that she cares about other people and she wants them to survive too, grappling with that, with the humanity of her fellow tributes and not being able to fully let go, not being able to fully immerse herself in the desensitization that is intended in the arena. And I thought that was really great development for her as a character as well, and also reinforces how messed up this system is in general. Oh, also, I keep thinking of more things I can mention that aren't super spoilery. I also love that it's called The Hunger Games, because the games themselves, while, the emphasis is on the violence and murdering each other and on some of the more gory or intense aspects of it, like these mutts, the mutations, killer tracker wasps, and so on, that can gruesomely kill the tributes. Obviously, also the tributes being forced to kill each other. In surviving, there are other hazards, but the main hazard is having fresh water and having enough food to survive the weeks in the arena, finding water and food without being murdered in the process. So much of their survival is about being able to feed themselves and not starving. But then it also echoes how in the districts, at least in the districts that we get to know more about, even in District 11, which is the agricultural district, and they're growing the crops for all of Panem, starvation is normal. Hunger is just totally accepted. And Rue even talks about how they don't get to eat the crops that they're harvesting. It's only during the harvest that they're given an adequate amount of food so that they have enough energy to harvest everything in time, so that they're not wasting food for the capital and to be distributed amongst the districts. And Katniss, of course, has experiences of hunger and starvation. That's just a constant refrain. And once again, that forced scarcity and distracting the districts, keeping them angry about other things and angry at each other. I think that's it for non-spoilery thoughts. Obviously, I really enjoyed this on a reread and I'm giving it 5 stars. I thought it was really great and I'm excited to read on in the series after this. But first, I'm going to share some spoilers. So let's do that now. Spoilers for all of the Hunger Games. If you don't want to be spoiled, skip it. There are chapters in the description box. You can easily tap over to the end of the spoiler section. First of all, Rue. Oh my God, I cried so much and I didn't remember that she was on the page for such a short amount of time. I kind of want to go back and count because I think she maybe was on the page for 10 pages max, if that. She's barely in this book, and she was by far the most vivid memory for me of my experience of reading it for the first time and seeing the movie. She's almost the only thing I remembered about the movie or the book at all. And in this read, once again, was by far the most emotionally impactful moments. All were surrounding Rue, with Katniss seeing her sister in Rue, Rue finally opening up and trusting Katniss and them becoming allies, and then Rue's tragic death and how horrifying that is and how devastating it is. All the aftermath of Katniss holding her as she died and singing to her, and then covering her in flowers. And it just, oh my God, beautiful and devastating. Collins did such a good job of creating a character that you immediately fall in love with. And again, just so clever to reinforce how horrific this is, because Rue is such a little kid. She's 12 and no 12-year-old should ever have to go through this, let alone, a 15-year-old or an 18-year-old or anyone or an adult. For a 12-year-old, it just drives it home so strongly. And even seeing Thresh later, who they weren't necessarily paired up, they didn't necessarily really know each other or care about each other, but he felt so protective of her. He was so angry over her death and was referring to her as the little girl, because all the tributes know that she shouldn't be there, and it's so horrifying. Also, I don't know how I possibly could have forgotten this, but the fact that at the very end, it's Peeta and Katniss and Cato, one of the careers, and they've been told, they've had this announcement that you're allowed to win in pairs if it's both people from the same district. And they make the assumption, the correct assumption, that the rule is because they're telling this love story about Katniss and Peeta, and the viewers at home love the idea that they could be the first tributes to win together because they're in love. So Katniss and Peeta have this hope now that they're not going to have to kill each other or allow one of them to be killed by Cato. They can win together if they can only outlive this one remaining teenage boy who's trained his whole life for this. And the fact that the ending is that they, tell me if I misinterpreted this, but to me, it sounded like they reanimated the bodies of all the dead tributes, including 12-year-old Rue, mutated them genetically, mixed them somehow with wolves, put bedazzled collars on them with the numbers indicating their district, and set them loose with the intention of mauling and cannibalizing the remaining tributes. How did I not remember that that happens? Because holy shit, horrifying. It was also described, I mean, not that graphic, I guess, but just the implications telling us that Kato is covered in body armor, essentially, that all that's open to the air is his extremities, his feet, his hands, and his head, and then telling us that these mutations, these zombies of his fellow tributes, have been feeding on him all night, and when the mutts are finally taken away and Katniss goes down to end his suffering, that he's just a pile of flesh and yet still alive. Oh my god. For a novel written for teens, that is intense. And I guess I understand, I'm certain that the movie did not keep this, because I feel like I would 100% remember this if I'd seen any visuals of this. I still can't believe I didn't remember it in general from reading the book, because it's so horrific on so many levels. The idea that you can't escape the Capitol, even in death, that they will still dehumanize you and use you as a weapon against your fellow citizens of the districts is just so fucked up. And it shouldn't be shocked that they would stoop to that because of all the other horrific cruelty they've engaged in, but it's still absolutely horrific. But the movie can't have done that, right? I feel like I have to rewatch the movie now, because how did they handle that? There's no way they did that as written in the book, and I can't believe that I didn't remember that that happened. That was so horrifying to read. I actually had to restart that section because I was sure that I missed something and I couldn't be reading it correctly. But no, I was reading it right. It's just absolute horror nightmare fuel. Then, of course, once it's just Peeta and Katniss left, there's the announcement that, oh, oops, sorry, we checked the rule book. You actually can't both be victors. So yeah, it's back to having to kill each other. Sorry about that. Tee-hee, rules are rules. Again, shouldn't be shocked that they would be willing to mislead them and then go back on their decision in such a horrific way, waiting for the most dramatic ending and making it the most exciting final kill of any Hunger Games ever, because one of the lovers is going to have to kill the other one or sacrifice themselves for the other one. I shouldn't be surprised, because they have shown their complete lack of humanity and their evil cruelty again and again, and yet I was still shocked. I didn't remember that happened either. And I loved that they decided to try to trick the organizers by making it seem like they were both going to eat poison berries at the same time and leave them without a victor. Again, that's what I was talking about the games needing a victor and sort of betting on them being too scared to let them both end it and finish the games without a victor and have it be this anticlimactic sort of failure. So they finally allow them both to win together. But once they're out and recovered and have had medical attention and have been refed for weeks because they have been essentially on the edge of starvation for so long, and they're finally being brought back into the Capitol to do interviews before being sent home to their mansions, Hamish, their mentor, tells Katniss that they are in trouble, that the Capitol, that the president are very angry, that they made them look bad, that they manipulated them into allowing both of them to win, and they really need to watch their back. And I had very few memories of this book. It was mostly just Rue that I remembered, and that Peeta and Katniss both somehow survived. But I remember literally nothing from book 2 and 3, so I don't know what happens next, but I assume that part of it is going to be they're in trouble and a target is on their back now. Also, one more thing for spoilers. When Hamish is telling her to be careful and that a target's on her back now, and she's thinking about how she didn't consider that now that she's out of the arena, it's not just her life at risk, but also the life of the people she loves and her family. And having read the prequels and knowing that Hamish had everyone he cared about murdered because he embarrassed the game makers, he embarrassed the Capitol, and he had to live in his luxury, in his victory, alone and grief-stricken for decades, and that's part of why he is the way he is in this book. Just so many layers of despair. Also, all the themes of trauma and grief and loss, and the ways that her grief for her dad were tied into her relationship to Rue and the way she connected to Rue, and that she felt kind of reconnected to this piece of her dad and their love of song and music through giving Rue her final wish of singing to her in her final moments. It was really well done, and I'm going to stop because I'm going to sob, and we don't need that. Anyway, I think that's it for spoilers, and I think those are all my thoughts for the Hunger Games. What an experience. This was really fantastic. So immersive. Like I said, it's just, in part it is that it's a book I read as a teen, so I'm sure there's some nostalgia there where it's reminding me of being a teenager and reading and being fully immersed, but I also think that there's something about this writing style that very much makes me feel like I'm back in my childhood, fully letting go of everything around me, just total immersion. Nothing else is happening except the world of the book, and I love that feeling. I also just think this does does such a great job of exploring its themes. It is a bit outdated. There are some terms and ideas in this book that very likely not be written into a book today. It was published over 15 years ago and language does change over time. I really do think this holds up quite well. And now I'm wondering if I should watch the movies. Let me know what you think. I'm not going to watch them for this video because this video is already going to be long reading the entire trilogy, but let me know in the comments if you would be interested in me watching the movies and or a watch along situation, because I'm very curious to see how the movies hold up and how they translate these ideas and this story and these characters to screen. Let me know. 5 stars for The Hunger Games. Very good. Put me through the ringer. Damn. So that was book 1 of the trilogy, and now it's time to move on to book 2, Catching Fire. I'm very excited. I, again, remember, I think, absolutely zero of what happens in this book, so I'm very curious to see where this goes. Okay, bye. Okay, I'm back. I am halfway through Catching Fire, which means I just finished chapter 14. I am on page 284 and I'm enjoying it. Like I said, I remembered less than nothing about what happens in this book, but it's good. It's immersive, it's engaging. I like that this book acknowledges that the victory tour is not only used to prevent the districts from forgetting about the games for the rest of the year. It's, you know, this extended thing, and therefore the games and also the losses that they suffered in their own district, pointing out, drawing attention to the fact that not only are they not allowed to forget the games, but they are forced to celebrate the games and celebrate the victors, who are likely, just by probabilities, basic math, to have not come from their district. And so they are forced to celebrate and cheer for the person who might have murdered their friends or family. And that's pretty dark. And again, just another example of the tight grip that the Capitol has on the districts and this reign of terror wrapped up in the bow of a happy celebration and unity. Also, without spoiling anything from the first book, I will say that there is a small act of independence that one of the tributes makes in the Hunger Games that happens in the first book. And in the moment, that tribute is only thinking about what they want and what they need. They are trying to protect themselves and someone they care about and not really considering the possible repercussions, whereas the Capitol and President Snow and many other people in the districts view this one small choice as an act of rebellion against the Capitol. And it becomes very clear that President Snow feels that because of outside circumstances not allowing them to swiftly punish this act of rebellion, whether it was intended as rebellion or not, has planted the seed in the districts and, you know, lit a fire under people across Panem who might have already been feeling that fury and that drive for rebellion. And President Snow is very actively trying to rein it in and prevent an uprising. I do like that this book is expanding into the world building of all the districts and the Capitol and how they intersect and more of the history, whereas the first book was much more focused on the specific 74th Hunger Games and Katniss and her experience within them and District 12 and their perspective on everything. I like that this book is expanding the scope more. I just started talking about something that honestly might be a spoiler, even though you might expect this particular character to still be around after book 1. It is kind of a spoiler for book 1 to tell you that they survive and are in book 2. I don't know if I can talk about any specific character in a non-spoiler way without spoiling book 1. So, Okay, I'll save that for a spoiler section. I think the only other things I can say is one, that there is, it was very vaguely gestured to in book one, but this book is touching a little bit more on the sexism of expectations of female and male tributes and victors, and I like that it's touching on that, even if it's not heavily focused on. Also, there is a bit of a love triangle situation developing in this book, and I feel like it's pretty well done. I'll talk about it again more in the spoiler section so I can reveal which characters are still alive to be in a love triangle. But as much as love triangles have become very tropey and are very overused, and in many books are pretty flimsy, and you often know which the preferred love interest is, and most people have no patience for one of the two possible love interests, and you can tell that the author has a heavy preference. In this book, I feel like it's really well done because not only do you get development of why the person caught in the middle has feelings for both of these other people and why they're struggling figuring out their own feelings, and the complexity of the timing and the different experiences that they've had with both people. You understand why they're trapped in indecision, and you also understand the many reasons why they might choose one or the other, and both make sense, and both would be so sad because they also have so many reasons to choose the other one. And there's also the factor, of course, that sometimes feeling, sometimes love is not super rational. And so whoever they might end up choosing might not be the more logical one, but again, would make sense. I just feel like Collins has done a very good job of incorporating this conflict without making it super overwrought, very tropey, without making it just lip service to make it more dramatic and to make it take more time for two characters to get together. It genuinely feels like it could go either way or neither way. And that would make sense. All of those outcomes would make sense. And I appreciate that. I feel like it's being very well handled, which is nice. I also think this book is doing a very good job of examining multiple characters and their trauma. I think book one was much more focused on grief. This book is leaning more into exploring trauma and PTSD. And I think it's being very well handled so far. It's quite affecting. It also has those flashes of grief as well and very heavily tied to the trauma, but it's definitely grappling with, for various characters, how they can continue on living and how do they live with things they've done or things they've witnessed. And I think that that is being handled quite well, at least in the first half. I'm going to go into a spoiler section that is spoilers for the first book in the trilogy and the first half of Catching Fire in a moment. I will just say that the writing style continues to be pretty straightforward, pretty simplistic, but very effective and quite evocative when it wants to be, when it wants to describe the setting or to describe a really emotional moment. I feel Collins has the ability to create something very evocative, but for the most part, it is quite straightforward. But I think that just helps keep the pacing nice and snappy and keeps you reading quickly and immersed. And again, it's aimed at teenagers, so I think more accessibility in the prose is probably a good thing. Very fair. So, spoilers starting now. You can skip them using the chapters down below if you don't want to be spoiled. So, the thing I started saying that I realized I couldn't say because I didn't want to reveal any of the characters who survived was talking about Katniss and her personality and some of her flaws that continue to be explored in this book. So obviously, if you've read the first book, then you know Katniss survives and so does Peeta. And we're following Katniss here. Of course, Katniss is in a love triangle with Peeta and Gale because she has grown to care about Peeta and love him, but she doesn't know if it's romantic or not. And her feelings are very confused, as you would expect, because the arena was a huge traumatic, terrifying experience, and her love for him kind of came out of duress. And then for Gale, she knew she loved him as a friend, but now she's confused about whether she loves him in a romantic way or not, and she's very conflicted. But the thing about her that is getting to me and that is reminding me how young she is and frustrating me with her immaturity, even though it makes sense because she is really young, it's realistic, it's just annoying, is her jumping to conclusions, her judgmental attitude, her superiority of everyone around her, and not only people from the Capitol who sometimes, maybe often, deserve that judgment, though she is pretty heavy-handed with it, even at times where they're just being normal people with feelings. And, you know, she's being a little harsh. But then also with people like Peeta, who sacrificed so much to keep her alive, was willing to sacrifice his life to keep her alive. She infantilizes him so much. She condescends to him so much. But I think the one that's getting me the most right now is her mother, because while, yes, her mother failed Katniss and Prim in the wake of their father's death, and Katniss has sort of had this realization after going through her own really intense experience in the arena and dealing with grief and trauma. She's she's realizing that sometimes you can't fully control your reaction to a traumatizing event like this and how overwhelming grief is. And realizing that her mother going into this catatonic state in her grief was not a choice her mother made. And so she's working to forgive her mother for that. I think that shows maturity and growth on Katniss's part. And I think it's also fair. It would be fair if she and Prim continued to, be a little angry at their mom forever for almost letting them starve to death as pretty young children. Katniss was only 11 and Prim was 7? Something like that. Their mother did not provide for them, did not make sure they were fed, didn't take care of their basic needs. That is neglect, that is abuse. I also think it's important to acknowledge, though, that it is not just her own personal failure, but also a systemic failure, yet another sign of this oppressive regime, because there is no social safety net. There is no welfare of any kind. I think they talk about there being a children's home that you would be sent to if your parents died or couldn't care for you, but that they were pretty horrific. But there's no system in place other than the tesserae, which you have to be between 12 and 18 to take to get extra food to support your family. There's no bereavement leave or disability or any, none of those social safety nets. So that is a systemic failure and likely an intentional choice by the government, yet another punishment to the districts, but also a method of control. But then also a lack of community involvement and engagement, in part because of the immense poverty and no one really having access to share to help these kids, but also a lack of engagement. Like the idea that she goes around as an 11-year-old starving to death, trying to feed herself and her little sister, and the baker's wife screams at her to leave and won't give her even the heel of a loaf of bread. There is a lack of community care. They don't have an extended family network to step in and support when something this horrific happens. You can look at the situation with nuance that their mother failed them, that their community and social systems also failed them and failed their mother as well. All of that to say, Katniss is having this realization that her mother didn't intentionally hurt them, that she didn't necessarily have a choice in this deep depression that she went into in her grief, but she also has then translated this into this sense about her mom where she is and she seemed to already have this, and some of this is like a parentification thing where she was forced to care for her mother, and so she has this sort of maternal, infantilizing view of her mother, but she seems to be incapable of viewing her mother with any nuance whatsoever or seeing any of her mother's internal strength. And yet she is shocked and so impressed every time her mother is healing anyone, when she sees her mother and how brave she is in the face of horrific wounds and, even very young children on their deathbed, and how deftly and efficiently she is able to care for them and how skilled she is, and also how well she's able to handle families and loved ones who are screaming at her, and deep in their own grief, she has this steadfastness to her. And Katniss sees that and appreciates it, and yet it has no impact. It doesn't move the needle at all in how she views her mom and her feeling that her mother needs to be protected from everything hard, I'm just waiting for Katniss to realize that her mother actually can be more than one thing at once and can have gone through this really difficult depression and grief and, dissociative state period where she wasn't able to care for her kids the way she should have. And also that now, and in many difficult contexts, she can be the mother that they need and she can support them and be there for them. And some of that's probably a trauma response and, protective mechanisms that your brain is going to develop if you go through that kind of neglect at such a young age. And I get that. She's so close and then she'll just miss it. And it makes sense based on her story and her age and all the other things. But I think I'm just looking at it and thinking, Katniss, you can actually lean on her for this. You can tell her this. You can ask for her support. She is capable of doing that for you. And I think she wants to do that for you. And it's a bit frustrating to see Katniss feel that she has to always do it on her own with everyone, including characters like Peeta, who has shown time and time again that he's there for her and that he can handle hard things, and she still won't let him in. He even has an outburst at her at one point, her and Haymitch, saying like, stop treating me like a baby. Just stop treating me like someone who can't handle anything and is too stupid to be in on your plans. And I was very proud of him in that moment because they have been treating him that way. Like he's this gentle soul that needs to be protected, because they have been treating him like that, and it would be frustrating as all hell. So I'm hoping for Katniss to have some growth throughout this book. I'm sure she will. I hope she will, because I am finding her a little frustrating in that sense. I do also love the way that the uprisings, the resistance is starting to grow. The scene of them going to District 11 and speaking directly to Thresh and Rue's families. I got so emotional. Their speeches and PETA offering to send a portion of their winnings to them every month of the next year as a thanks for keeping them alive and to recognize their sacrifice, and also the things that Katniss was saying, both about respecting Thresh and his morals and standing up for what he believed in and not joining up with the couriers. And then Rue and how, she's talking about how everywhere she looks, she sees Rue. In everything beautiful, she sees Rue. And most of all, she sees Rue in her little sister Prim, and that she misses her all the time. And I think she says, "Thank you for your children," which just broke me. And then someone in the crowd whistling Rue's 4-note tune, everyone doing the District 12 salute of mourning and saying goodbye to a loved one who has passed to Katniss, just was so emotional and beautiful. And that really stoic and peaceful protest, a moment of solidarity and resistance. And of course, even the most peaceful protest, even the quietest moment of solidarity has to be shut down, and several people are murdered immediately in the moment in cold blood, which is just horrific. And we start to see multiple districts having these roilings of uprising. District 8 having an uprising. They're the garment manufacturing district. We have District 4, which is on the coast. They're the fishing district. And it's just spreading everywhere like a virus. And that moment of the berries, that moment of threatening the capital with losing their symbolic victors, of exiting their game altogether and not playing by their rules, was enough to light a fire under all of these people across Panem that have so much anger and fury, that are so tired of being oppressed. And the idea that Snow, I'm sure he knew that Katniss couldn't stop what had started, but this expectation that she could maybe play the part of being so in love with PETA that she could stop the rebellion in its tracks, and putting that pressure on her was just ridiculous. And I really loved the moment when Katniss realized that she could never do it and she could never do enough. Maybe she should just join the rebellion instead of trying to quell it. Did she really believe in quelling it anyway? I thought that was a great moment for her. Speaking of quells, the third quarter quell, 75th anniversary, the idea that the 2 prequels each take place in one of the quarter quells, the 25th anniversary and the 50th, and this is now the 75th, and each one of them has some special twist. And this special twist this time, which Katniss suspects was specifically chosen for them in this situation, is that the tributes have to be chosen from past victors. And since District 12 only has 3 living victors and only one of them is a woman, Katniss is guaranteed to go back to the arena. And the way that her reaction to that is written, her despair, her terror, the way that her body reacts before her brain can even fully process, and she has to run and scream and hide, and just all of the memories coming back. She is so traumatized from her first time in the arena, and she thought that as much as there were so many ways that the Capitol could hurt the people she loved and terrorize her and force her into a life she didn't want, marrying PETA, having children who would then have to go in the arena, she thought the one thing they couldn't do to her was send her back, and they're doing the one thing she thought they couldn't do to her, and her body is just revolting. And it was so well done. It was so visceral and intense, and reminds you not only the intensity of trauma and this PTSD that she is living with now, which I thought was well described, but also just how young she is, and the idea that she had to do this once is horrifying enough, but having to go through it twice, no one should have to deal with that level of psychological torture. I also found it interesting, just in the last chapter that I read, they watched the recap of the last quarter quell when Hamish was the winner. And I found it really interesting to get that bullet point recap of his entire experience in the arena and compare it to reading the prequel that is an entire book writing out his experience, and from his perspective, of course, instead of from the Capitol's propaganda perspective. Because for me, reading the summary, knowing the extended version from the prequel, it hit much harder because I remembered all of those moments, and it was bringing up the emotions I felt reading the prequel, and how sad I was when certain characters died, and how intense some of the scenes were, and how hard it was for Hamish to do all the things he had to do through his experience, and what happened to him when he got home, and why he became an alcoholic and is so deep in his trauma, self-isolating to such an extreme degree, and how tragic that whole story was. So I was just wrapped, and that summary brought so much back. But it makes me wonder if you had just recently read the trilogy and then read the prequels, or if you reread the trilogy before the prequels to prepare, would reading this chapter that summarizes most of the main events of his time in the arena kind of remove some of the tension from reading the prequel, because you know how several of the characters die, including that final climactic battle. Anyway, what I'm saying is, if you reread the trilogy or read it for the first time relatively close to reading the prequels, did you feel that your experience of Sunrise on the Reaping, is that what the second prequel is called? Yeah. Sunrise on the Reaping, was your experience of Hamish's story in the second quarter quell, the 50th, diminished at all from reading the summary? Because I'd be curious to know how that lands for you, or did it not really change anything for you? The last thing I wanted to touch on in a little bit more detail, I think the love triangle is really being handled quite well. I was worried at the start because I remembered, like I said, I remembered two vague things about this book. One was that a rebellion of sorts was starting, was broiling, and the other was that there was a love triangle between Katniss and Gale and Peeta. I was worried it was going to be too much of the plot, that it was going to be overwrought, that it was going to annoy me, because it's become such a trope to have a love triangle in dystopian fiction, especially YA dystopian fiction, and in a lot of fantasy. But like I said, I think it's being done really well because Katniss has so much history with Gale, and she obviously loved him so deeply as a friend prior to entering the Hunger Games. It makes sense that now that she's back and he has confessed his love to her and kissed her, that she's now viewing their friendship in a different way, struggling to understand her own feelings and whether she does actually love him or not, simultaneously having been forced into a romantic relationship with Peeta that she didn't initially want, but has grown to rely on, that she really needed Peeta through her time in the arena, especially at the end there to survive, that they grew to rely on each other so intimately at the end of their time in the arena that she grew to really love and care about him. But again, she doesn't know if that's romantic or not, because the pressure was this external pressure to make it romantic, and she never was able to decide for herself or figure out her own feelings, especially in this super high stress, intensive, traumatizing experience, whether she loves him as a friend, as someone she really cares about, but doesn't have romantic feelings for, or if she is romantically in love with him. And all of that is roiling together. All of that is so messy and mixed up. And she's 16. Kissing Peeta was the first time she'd ever kissed a boy. And like, it's just all so fresh and new, and also totally tied up with trauma bonds and basic survival, that it makes sense that she is confused. Like I said in the non-spoiler section, I think her choosing Gale makes total sense. Her choosing Peeta makes total sense. And her deciding not to choose either, that she's actually not romantically in love with either, or that she doesn't want to have to make that choice, also makes total sense. I even think Gale and Peeta ending up together makes sense. As Gale admitted, it would be easier if he could hate Peeta, but he can't because he's just such a gem. And I think Peeta admitted that Gale is really hot. So, you know, maybe it could just be a little polyamory trio of joy. I don't think that's the direction it goes in. And maybe acknowledging the fact that really deep friendships can get confusing, and you can confuse that really intertwined, also trauma bonded kind of friendship love, platonic love, as possibly romantic, because it's hard sometimes to conceptualize a platonic love that is that deep and enduring without it necessarily turning into something romantic. But of course that can exist and does exist. So anyway, I think it's being well done. Hopefully the second half continues in that vein. I would love to not be proven wrong by everything getting overwrought and melodramatic, but we'll see. I'm having a really good time. I'm enjoying, like I said, the expansion into the rest of the world, the rest of the districts. I'm loving the Mockingjay coming back again and again as a symbol of the revolution. But anyway, I think that's it for spoilers. Sorry there are so many, but of course, by its very nature, as I continue through the trilogy, more basic plot points and characters being around are spoilers for earlier books. So I apologize, but hopefully most of you have read this and you can watch the spoilers anyway, so it doesn't bother you. But I'm going to go finish Catching Fire, and I'll be back when I'm done to let you know what I think. I just finished Catching Fire and I'm kind of mad at that cliffhanger ending. It's tempered by the fact that I have the third book right here and can start it as soon as I stop yapping about this book. So I don't have to wait very long for the resolution of that cliffhanger. But that was not an ending, okay? I wonder how I felt about this as a child. Did they come out like a year apart? Future me will look this up. Diabolical behavior. Anyways, otherwise though, I really liked this. Spoiler-free thoughts. I think the first half was better paced than the second half. I liked that the first half expanded our understanding of the world. I think I talked about this in the first update. It really allows you to take a step back, get a bird's eye view of all the districts and how they intersect and what conditions are like in other districts and what the feeling toward the government is like in the different districts. And it just gives us a little more context for how this world exists and what the system is like. And it also gave us some quieter moments, some sort of slice of life moments that I really appreciated for character building reasons. And the second half is the Hunger Games happening again. And I won't say too much again for possible spoiler reasons, but we follow what happens at the next Hunger Games, the Quarter Quell, and it felt a little rushed to me. It was a really interesting setup. The arena itself was a really cool design. There were a lot of really interesting characters. The tributes were really cool. And I just feel like we didn't get to know them nearly as well as I would have wanted. And there were a few moments that I think they were emotional. I was sad, but then it just moved on so fast. I think they even said in it that it was one of the fastest. People were getting killed faster than in any past Hunger Games. And it felt like a much shorter period of time than the Hunger Games in the first book. It just felt a little uneven to me, and not that I needed this book to be hundreds of pages longer, but I think there were a few key scenes that could have been given one extra page to let us really sit in that loss, and a couple more mechanisms of the arena that we could have been given a little more time with to drive home the horror. There was also one detail about this arena that was used as a way to comment on something from the first Hunger Games, and it sort of undid part of what felt like really intense and confronting commentary from the first book. So I didn't love that too much. I just felt like the second half was good. I liked it. I liked so many aspects of it. It just felt like it was rushing through, and I'm not sure it needed to rush quite so much. And then it just ends very abruptly. Not as satisfying as book one. I really did enjoy it overall. There were some characters who we lose in this book who I really liked, and I was mad. I think our protagonist in this book regressed a bit from how they were portrayed in the first book. I'm trying to be cagey for like zero spoilers whatsoever for the first book, if possible, in this section. So our protagonist here is in the first book, and I feel like they're less intuitive and less on the ball in this book, and that was kind of annoying for me personally. I just think that there were aspects of this that could have been given a little more time, given a little more weight, giving us the chance to really feel them and be invested in the way that I think the first book was really perfectly paced. This one was a little messy in that department. And I think that might be all I can say without spoilers. For the second half of this book. I'm trying, y'all. So let's talk spoilers for Catching Fire. That also means spoilers for the Hunger Games. If you somehow read Catching Fire and not Hunger Games, I don't understand you, but I respect you. Anyway, so Catching Fire. Yeah, like I said, I think the time in the arena was rushed. It was such a cool concept. I loved the idea of it being a clock, and each wedge of the clock has its own deadly, terrifying aspect to it. You have to try to figure out what each thing is and how do you fight all of them? How do you survive them? The wheel structure of it, very interesting. I wish we'd seen each section. It annoys me that there are wedges that we just are guessing what's in them, or we know that it's probably really dangerous and the people in that section were really hacked up, but we don't know how or why. I wanted to know how or why. It just felt like we were rushing through it. I also felt like all the victors were interesting. We only got to know maybe half of them, if that, and the ones we got to know, we still spent so little time with them. It felt like they were together for 3 days, if that. And I wanted more because each and every one was so interesting, and obviously a number of them survive. At least the ones that were allied with Katniss and Peeta. Maybe they're going to be in the next book as part of this revolution as they go to District 13. But I just wanted more of them here. Finnick was really interesting. I think we probably got the most from him. And especially some of the ones that died in this book. So obviously we're not going to see more from them in the next one. Mags, Wyrus. I guess it makes sense that the elderly victors would probably not survive. Both times it happened so fast and it was so anticlimactic. And I was just sitting there mad that the awesome characters who I was getting to know, especially Mags. I was upset at how she went out, and Wyrus was just killed so suddenly out of nowhere, and that's it. And basically no one reacts to it at all. At least Finnick was really upset over losing Mags, if only for one night, basically. I just felt like we needed more time with these characters and getting to know their dynamic together. These games felt like they were done in 3 days, 4 days, or something like that, instead of weeks and weeks and weeks like book one. And it didn't need to be as long. But again, just compared to the first half of the book, which really has this languid pace and is expanding the world and giving all this more context and having moments that are very slice of life and giving us lots of slow scenes exploring various things. And then the time in the arena is just done. I found it a bit jarring. Katniss continues to never think past her first instinct in anything, also to have very bad takes from time to time and just not ever think that someone might not just be trying to murder her all the time, or that there might be some reason why someone did something other than just hating her. It did start to get a little annoying. Maybe that's her fatal flaw. I don't know. I did like her and Peeta's relationship developing the way it is, although I feel like because this ends with Peeta not with them and Gale being with her, that now she's going to connect deeper with Gale, and then she's going to be reunited with Peeta later, and then she's going to be like, oh no, I took it further with both of them. Now I'm even more stuck. And that's kind of annoying to me, but fine. The Jabberjays imitating their loved ones and driving them mad by having them hear realistic recording screams of their loved ones was up. I also hate the trend of all these characters never telling each other the plan and then just hoping it's going to work out. I feel like I didn't comment on that in the first book, but I should have, because it's getting worse now. It's like, talk to each other. It's one thing if you think that you're about to be tortured, so you don't want to tell them something so that they won't give it away under duress, but at some point you just have to share the plan so you can all work on the plan together. And there are so many moments where, especially for Katniss, in her internal monologue, she's like, Peeta thinks that we succeeded because he doesn't know what I know, which is that we actually failed miserably, but I'm obviously not going to tell him. And then he does something that doesn't serve their needs because he doesn't know the situation. And then she gets upset. And it's like, well, maybe you should have talked to each other. I don't know. Could help. Just a thought. I found this one funnier than the first book. Generally, the first book had some funny moments. This one had me laughing more often, I feel. I feel like Katniss got dumber and less intuitive, but she also got snarkier in a funny way that I appreciated. So I guess it kind of evens out. And then the one thing that I feel kind of ruined an aspect of the first book for me is that we have a line in here talking about the Jabberjays who are imitating their loved ones and sort of driving them mad with hearing their loved ones scream and cry and beg. Katniss is thinking it wasn't real. The same way the mutation wolves last year weren't really the dead tributes. It's just a sadistic trick of the game makers. And I feel like that kind of ruined part of the horror of the first book and the commentary on even in death you can't escape the Capitol. And I guess you still have that message because they're using their likeness and sort of making fun of them, making them into this grotesque form of entertainment by using their likeness to create these weird human wolf hybrids to attack and eat the other contestants. And I guess that's, it's still messed up anyway, but I just feel like it's even more horrifying for obvious reasons and even more effective in the way that it really drives home the themes in such a horrifying way if they are actually somehow using parts of or just literally using the bodies of the dead tributes. So I don't know. I didn't love that. I mean, I did react pretty strongly to that reading the first book, but I feel like if you're going to do it, do it. If you're going to do it, commit to it. Maybe it's a little much for a YA book, but also I read enough horror to know that sometimes the most horrific things are the things that really stick with you and make the most impact thematically. That's part of why I really like horror, for exploring difficult issues. And this book is exploring a lot of really dark, difficult issues. And if it is pulling punches in terms of how horrific it is, then it's going to be less effective. So I kind of wish she just stood by it, unless she literally never meant it to be read that way. And so that's why she was trying to fix it. But you already wrote it like that. So can't take it back now. I mean, you can. My headcanon says no. I feel the first half had more to deliver in terms of the themes. The second half was much more about just the arena. I like the way that in the interviews with the victors, almost all of them just condemned the Capitol in a variety of ways and said, like, isn't this sad that you're going to lose us? You're also connected to us. We're your victors. You love us. We're like your favorite reality TV show stars, and you're going to kill all of us. Isn't that going to be so sad for you? I found that really hilarious and also probably pretty effective at turning the general citizenry of the Capitol against the powers that be, using their sort of language, using their interest in this as entertainment against them in that way. And the iconic moment of Katniss's wedding dress turning into a Mockingjay black feather dress was very epic. And the moment of all the victors holding hands and showing their solidarity as a group, I kind of hoped that that would turn into them literally all banding together and refusing to kill each other once they were in the arena. Alas, I mean, a lot of them did get together as allies, but I feel like that would have been a really great message, but I guess maybe some of them couldn't have been convinced. Hamish clearly put a lot of work into convincing a lot of them to work together, but maybe he couldn't quite convince all of them, including the careers, which I guess makes sense. But those are spoilers for Catching Fire. If I forgot anything really important, I'll come back tomorrow morning and tell you. I liked this book, but I feel like in a lot of ways it was a bridge to book 3, which a lot of second books in a trilogy do. I think for this one, I'm probably sitting more around a 4-star for me personally. 4 stars is a great rating. I just think it lacked in a few areas that I would have loved to see. And that means I'm gonna go start Mockingjay, final book of the trilogy. I'm prepared to be surprised and hopefully entertained and hopefully made to think about lots of the themes that have been brought up so far. So I'm gonna do that. It's the next morning, I'm back, I'm halfway through Mockingjay, and I don't have that many things to say, to be honest. I feel like a lot of the commentary I've already had applies. It's a very different tone and setting, I would say, in this book, at least in the first half, than the other two, for a variety of spoiler reasons. And I think it's probably pretty fitting that the tone here is pretty bleak considering the circumstances, but it is dragging a little bit more for me. I feel like the pacing is pretty slow. There's a lot less happening plot-wise. It's not quite as driving and immersive. There's not as much forward momentum with the plot. And while we are spending more time with some of the characters that I grew to really like in the second half of Catching Fire that I was hoping would show up again in Mockingjay, I feel like we're still not getting as much time with them as I wanted. And a lot of what we are getting is just kind of a little repetitive, the same characters having the same or very similar conversations over and over again, and a lot of being in our protagonist's head as they think about and work through and discover similar things multiple times. It's just not quite grabbing me as much. It's not doing as much for me, and I think it's meant to, sort of like how in the first half of Catching Fire, we expanded our view of the world out past just District 12 and the capital to the rest of the districts and to understand the larger picture better. In this book, we're expanding once again and getting a different perspective on the system and what rebellion against this kind of system could look like. We're meeting brand new characters, and I feel like they're really getting very little page time and not making much of an impression on me. The characters that have been here since book 1 are not getting a lot of development or progressing at all in this book. The only character I would say from the first book that is having any significant growth or change in this book has also barely been in this book, although they are, based on recent events, likely going to be more involved in the second half. So hopefully we'll see more of how what's happened to them over the last couple books has impacted them and changed them. I think the thing that I'm finding most interesting is how both the capital, the establishment, and those who are trying to rebel against it are so hyper-focused on image, on messaging, on having a strong symbol of their movement, on perfect styling, and even to the point of a character who is meant to sort of be the face of the revolution and has been through it in the last little while, has scars and bruises and burns and things, and they want to repair all of those things and then strategically reapply new scars and burns and bruises that are more aesthetically pleasing so that that person looks like they're a fighter and they've been through it and they survived, but in a more beautiful way instead of a realistic way. So I do find that interesting in and of itself, the commentary on that focus on projecting a very specific image and how even the revolution, the rebellion, is using a similar form, even calling it propaganda, creating these videos to try to disseminate to the rest of the districts and also to the capital to try to sway people to their cause. I think it's interesting that this book is drawing attention to the idea of using the oppressor's tools against them, taking their tactics and adapting them to your cause to fight fire with fire, essentially. But I also think that it's criticizing that choice and hinting at the idea that Audre Lorde is famous for pointing out that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And this concept in general of, in the process of trying to defeat an oppressive force, becoming just as bad, if not worse than them, losing what made you different, losing what made you kinder, more compassionate, more fair, while in the throes of war, and becoming equally as bad for the people who are living under you. And that's something that's being commented on in multiple arenas in this book, and I find that interesting. Now, I don't think that those who are engaging in rebellion against the Capitol and President Snow are as bad as he is, but they're certainly not perfect innocent angels. And they have made choices that people could disagree with, and they have hurt and killed people, and they have made choices to not engage and not help people when they could have potentially. And it's all quite messy, and revolution always is messy. But I just appreciate that Collins is engaging with that idea at all and presenting the rebellion as complex and nuanced and not better than the Capitol and President Snow in every single way, that they also have their flaws and that they might not be living up to their own ideals. And I think it's worth engaging in that complexity when you are talking about a dystopian authoritarian government and trying to overthrow the government sort of story. I think it is all too easy to present the current government as totally evil and the rebellion as totally good when there's often more nuance to that situation. And while in this case the Capitol and President Snow are pretty objectively evil, the rebellion is not as objectively good as you would maybe expect in a book like this that would simplify the message significantly. Collins didn't take the easy way out to make it that simple. I'm still struggling with the same character that I was struggling with in the last book. They continue to not be aware of their own flaws in a particular area, and it's making it quite irritating to follow them around all the time. I like them as a character, but they're starting to get on my nerves. I'm starting to lose patience a little bit with them in multiple ways. One way that I haven't even talked about up to this point, I'll bring it up in the spoiler section because I'm still trying to be cagey about who the protagonist is because I don't want to spoil anything about who survives in the earlier books. But there is something that bugged me in the first book, but I thought maybe I was being overly sensitive about it, so I didn't bring it up. And then it continued to bug me in the second book. But I thought, no, it's not worth bringing up. I'm probably just overreacting. And then the third book comes around and I feel like it's getting even more glaring and it's really annoying me. So I'll bring it up in the spoiler section. But there's also a reveal about one of the other characters, one that we were introduced to in Catching Fire, that adds so much complexity to who they are and to their experience and adds an extra layer of despicable evil to President Snow and the Capitol that just adds even more nuance to how oppressive of a regime it is and how little they view citizens of the districts as human beings who should have basic human rights. And that was really devastating to read about, and I had totally forgotten that aspect of it, so it sort of took me by surprise. It was kind of like getting punched in the gut, and I already really liked that character, and so to hear them recount what they've been through in such a deadpan, sort of matter-of-fact way, because they've just sort of been numbed to the suffering, was really heartbreaking, and again, just added so much more nuance to how horrific the system is. And without trying to not spoil anything, it does have to do with trafficking and the dehumanization of the victors of the games, and just very messed up. So I'm still finding it interesting. Obviously, I managed to talk for a while about it, so there are still interesting ideas being explored, and I do appreciate the nuance, the complexity, but it is going pretty slow. So I'm hoping the second half picks up. I'm hoping we get a bit more growth and change in some of these characters because they are feeling a bit stagnant. But like I said, I remember nothing about this book, basically, so I really don't remember where it goes and what happens. Hopefully it will surprise me in a good way and end on a high note. So I think that's it for non-spoiler thoughts. I am going to do a short spoiler section for the first half of Mockingjay, and of course also spoiling Catching Fire Fire and The Hunger Games. So skip this with the chapters in the description box if you don't want to be spoiled, but spoilers starting now. So Finnick is the victor from District 4 who was allied with Peeta and with Katniss in the games in the Quarter Quell in the last book. And he is known as this playboy. He's really attractive, and he's known to sleep around in the capital and use his beauty for riches and things like that. And in this book, we learn that he had not chosen that life for himself, that President Snow was pimping him out, basically, was selling him to rich people in the capital. And he had no choice, because if he refused, President Snow would have killed the girl he loved back home and his family and anyone else he loved. And it was just so hard to read that section and him talking about it, and really admirable that he found a way to try to turn it around and to empower himself by trading for secrets and learning things about the rich and wealthy people of the capital so he could have some form of control over them, including President Snow. And it really takes a certain amount of strength and resilience to be able to find a way to get some sort of good out of such a horrific situation. But I just felt so terribly for him in that section. And I felt it did a really good job of adding so much more nuance to his character and explaining so much about the parts of him that maybe seemed disparate. All of a sudden, so much more made sense. And it's also just so sad because he wants to just be home in District 4 with a girl he loves, and he's not allowed to be in peace even after he has won in the arena, survived the arena twice at this point. And, when are they given peace? And the answer is never. They're never allowed to have peace because they aren't viewed as human beings. They are 100% totally dehumanized and turned into entertainment in every possible form after they win. If they manage to survive, they will be a performer in the circus for the capital and for President Snow specifically for the rest of their lives. Otherwise, he will kill everyone they've ever loved or torture and kill them. Just very dark. Also, Katniss is still a protagonist. Of course, she is the Mockingjay. She is the symbol of the rebellion, and they need her to be their spokesperson. And what I was talking about with the image that they're presenting was about Katniss. They wanted to bring her back to a neutral where she looks beautiful and is pristine, and then give her new battle wounds that are a little more palatable to the eye, which is quite interesting. What that says about both the rebellion and this world in general, that is an expectation. And again, sort of hinting at the sexism of the situation, because would they have the same expectation of her if she wasn't a woman? And trying to find the balance of how much makeup should she be wearing on camera, and what is her sort of superhero suit look like. They spent a lot of time designing it to look a particular way. And they want her to film all these propaganda films that they're going to try to get onto this public access TV. And she's really struggling with that, understandably. And she is really upset that they didn't rescue Peeta and that Peeta is in President Snow's clutches and potentially being tortured. And of course, we learn at the very end of the first half that Peeta has been brainwashed, essentially using the engineered wasps to basically taint every memory he has of Katniss and to make him deeply suspicious and afraid of her, so that when they reunite, when they finally rescue him, he tries to murder her and strangles her almost to death. And that's pretty horrific for everyone involved. And they really have no idea if they can reverse the brainwashing that's been done on him. I do struggle with Katniss. And I talked about this in the last two books, so I'll try not to repeat myself too much. She is still going full speed ahead in her assuming the absolute worst of everyone all the time, unless proven otherwise. And to prove otherwise, you have to work really hard. She's still ignoring the strengths her mother has other than her healing. It's the only thing she will accept that her mother can do is heal people. There's even a section where she's talking about how Prim has inherited the best of everyone in their family. I look at my little sister and think how she has inherited the best qualities our family has to offer. My mother's healing hands, my father's level head, and my fight. And it's like, your mother has an incredibly level head. Every time someone is bleeding out or burnt to a crisp or barely alive, she has a very level head, even when people are screaming at her and lunging at her. Like, why do you keep ignoring what your mom has to offer? It's getting very annoying. Also, I didn't bring this up in past updates because, like I said, I thought I was being maybe a little bit sensitive to it, but Katniss and her deep, abiding hatred of the cat Buttercup, her little sister's cat, is so over the top, and honestly, it's starting to really sour me on Katniss. It was bad enough that earlier she talked very glibly about how she almost drowned the kitten because she didn't want another mouth to feed. Now we're at the point where she is just constantly belittling the cat, making fun of the cat. She says, the idea that I've wounded the brute's tiny cat feelings just invites further taunting, but Prim's genuinely distressed for him. So instead, I visualize Buttercup's fur lining a pair of gloves, an image that has helped me deal with him over the years. Is that supposed to make her likable? Because what the fuck? What are you talking about? She goes on to talk about how she likes playing this game, basically laser pointer tag with the cat, not because the cat enjoys it, but because she thinks it makes the cat look stupid, and so that's why she enjoys it. It's just like, why do you hate this cat so much? What has this cat done to you, legitimately, other than give your sister comfort and be cute? Like, leave the cat alone. Maybe the cat doesn't like you because you're an asshole. Damn. They're in District 13 now. She is the Mockingjay. They're creating propaganda films. I also found it, actually, one more thing I found sort of sad, and I would like to see the book engage with the nuance more, but I'm not sure if it will, because her prep team have been kidnapped from the Capitol to keep her beautiful, even as the Mockingjay. But I guess they either didn't fully understand the rules around, like the very strict rules around rations and how much food you get, or because they spent their whole life in the Capitol, that they just didn't fully conceptualize it or didn't realize how serious it was, and they kept taking a little bit of extra bread. And the result was to stuff them in a tiny cell to sit in their own waste for an extended period of time, and they're in a terrible state and terrified. And when Katniss is upset about that treatment that they've received, Gale is going on and on about how could she possibly defend them, and talking about how, you know, they were willing to dress you up and make you look pretty to go to your death. How could you excuse that? And she's like, yeah, I guess he's right, but I just can't help but feel bad for them. Like, they don't know better. They're basically like children. And I'm like, both of you are wrong. Because yes, they were complicit in the system, and yes, there are things that they didn't really fully understand because they could only rely on their own experience, and they didn't have an understanding of what it was like in the districts, and they also had never known another life, so they were ignorant. But they were fully aware of their actions and are adults and can be held responsible, while also acknowledging the nuance of the situation, that they also live under this authoritarian regime. And while they may have more privileges living in the Capitol, they still are living in fear. They still are aware that if they displease President Snow, they will be executed, or their loved ones will be executed or tortured, or that they could be turned into an Avox and have their tongue cut out. They are not living in some happy-go-lucky, egalitarian, utopian society. The last game maker created the Hunger Games that Peeta and Katniss were in initially was killed. He was executed because he failed. So everyone knows that they are, you know, balancing on the tip of a pin, and any wrong step, any sign of possible dissent, anything but full enthusiasm for the system and for the games and for President Snow. And they know that they are constantly under surveillance and being listened to, and that anyone could report on them, that they could be next, that they could be tortured and murdered, or that the people they love could be tortured and murdered. And it's just, there's a lack of nuance. Like, yes, they have the privilege to have never gone hungry, probably, although we also know from the prequels that in the past there were times that people in the Capitol went hungry as well. But it just ties back to what Hamish said in the last book, which is, remember who the enemy is. And the enemy is not random citizens of the Capitol who have been told that they have to be a hairdresser for the tributes in the arena. They didn't build this system. They don't have any power in this system, and they are not the reason why the Hunger Games is happening, right? And even for them, you know, Gale can't understand how Katniss would possibly care about them and be sad about their treatment. They were sobbing their eyes out when Katniss had to go back into the arena, assuming that she wouldn't be likely to survive again. They genuinely cared about her, and they knew how dangerous it was, and they were scared for her and mourning the possible loss of her. Like, they understand the reality of what's happening, but they have had to compartmentalize and use some strong cognitive dissonance to be able to do their job, because they also can't refuse. They aren't free either. None of them are free under the system. So anyway, I just wish it would engage a little bit more with the complexity of that. That conversation tried to somewhat with Katniss kind of standing up for them, but she also, again, used the argument of they're like infants. They don't really understand what's happening. And that's not really it's not really a strong argument, and it's not really accurate either. It's lacking context for the fact that everyone under the system is living in terror, even if their day-to-day lives might look a little different. Right? Because we even see that with characters like her friend Madge, who is the mayor's daughter in District 12. Katniss in the last book at one point tells her, why don't you go to the Capitol to get extra medical help for your mother? And she says, we can't just go to the Capitol. we have to be invited. So even the mayor of District 12, who is essentially, like the governor of District 12, he is in charge and presumably has the most power of literally anyone in the district, is not allowed to just go to the Capitol and get medical attention for his wife. So again, it's like, yes, they might have more privilege relatively, but again, fighting amongst yourselves is not useful. The useful thing is to remember who the actual enemy is and to direct your ire in that direction together, united, instead of quibbling amongst yourselves. So I would have liked it to address that a little bit more. Maybe it will, although I have a feeling that we're not going to come back to it. I was a little dissatisfied with how that conversation was handled. So we'll see. But anyway, I think that's it for my spoilery thoughts. But for now, I'm just going to go and finish reading Mockingjay, and I'll be back when I'm done for my final thoughts on Mockingjay, my final thoughts on the entire trilogy, and maybe a little bit of a post-mortem recap of my thoughts on the entire series, including the prequels, and whether rereading the trilogy has changed my perspective on the prequels at all. I just finished Mockingjay. I feel a little wrung out, Why do I keep reading books that make me cry and make me feel like someone is sitting on my chest and I can't quite breathe? Multiple reading vlogs in a row of me debating with myself if I should include footage of me reading the end of a book and sobbing. So, hope you enjoy. I stand by what I said about the first half. I do think the first half was very slow. The second half definitely had more action, honestly very similar to Catching Fire in its general pacing and structure, although this one didn't have a Hunger Games section. Definitely a slower build up and sort of reacting to, recovering from the last book's events and planning for what's to come, and then the second half full of action. This book definitely continued to grapple with the reality of trauma and grief, PTSD, and just the long-lasting effects of so much loss and so much suffering on both sides of it, losing people that these characters love, but also them being forced into the situation where they have to take innocent lives and how that fundamentally changes them forever. We see lots of different versions of trauma and how these characters are processing everything they've been through, and it makes it very heavy and dark and dreary, but it also feels pretty realistic, and it also feels pretty appropriate for a book that is about this kind of extremely messed up system that is, by its very nature, incredibly oppressive and dehumanizing and evil. And then the attempt at tearing that down and, like I was talking about in the halfway update, grappling, my favorite word for this video. I feel like I've said grappling so many times, but really trying to tease apart our feelings around what's good and what's bad, and what is justified in war, what is justified in a revolution, in trying to tear down a corrupt government. And it's the kind of question that doesn't have any easy answer. But there's also something to be said for facing full on the realities of rebellions and revolutions, using the oppressor's tactics against them, tactics that are in large part often the motivation to rebel in the first place, things that are considered to be unethical or evil or cruel. And is an eye for an eye justified? Can an eye for an eye ever be considered true justice? And there's so many moments in this book where the characters have to face that head on, and they have different reactions to it based on their personalities and their lived experience and what they value. And there is no clear, easy answer. There's nothing easy in war and in revolution. And it also makes it hard to read, too. I think this book also is trying to examine the realities of war, the death of innocence, the targeting of innocent people specifically as a strategic dick move. People really losing touch with their empathy and their humanity and the humanity of others and starting to see it as us versus them, a team sport. We have to win at all costs, and that allowing them to dehumanize people and to move forward with atrocities, thinking that the ends justify the means. And I just think there are so many real life, I mean, obviously through all of human history, there have been so many examples of this, and it's painful and it's hard to reckon with. I had a few moments of being shocked in this second half. I think Collins did a good job of burying the lead a few times or making you believe one thing was about to happen and then things shifted. There were also some character deaths that I did not remember whatsoever that totally shocked me and upset me a lot. And the kind of character deaths where in the moment as I'm reading it, I'm thinking, this is senseless. You've done this just for shock value. I'm so angry. And then as I thought about it more, I thought, maybe it makes sense. Maybe it makes sense for the themes being explored. Maybe it makes sense for the arc of this story. Maybe it makes sense for the story that Collins is trying to tell. I don't actually think these deaths were just for shock value. I think they were to demonstrate the realities of war. And I think if no character that we knew and liked died, it would not have the same impact and would be very unrealistic. That doesn't mean that the deaths didn't make me mad, because they did, but I think Collins intentionally chose characters that would make you sad and angry and upset, because that's kind of the point. War doesn't spare anyone, no matter how innocent or how much someone's already been through, you know? I think that might be all I can talk about without spoilers. It's very hard not to spoil either of the earlier books and this one, but I do think that Collins did a really good job of constructing this story. As much as I struggled a bit with the structure and pacing of the second two books, I do think that they did enough really well to still be engaging and immersive and to be exploring their themes in a really interesting way. I really appreciated getting a lot more nuance in this book. Not that the other books weren't nuanced, but I think this book, Mockingjay specifically, was all about getting into that gray area and making it very clear again and again that there is no easy answer and it all sucks. And it's all terrible. And there is no good and bad, at least not clearly delineated as we might want. And I appreciate that a lot. I think there were a few aspects that I wanted to see explored a little bit more explicitly, but I do think that there were a few choices in the second half of the book that tried to at least gesture at some of those things, even if they didn't take the time to fully dive into them, including sort of the complicity of the average citizen within a regime like this, and also, you know, again, the muddiness there of being complicit, but also being as much under the control of the system and at risk of losing your life to the system as anyone else. And I think this book was also trying to make some points about who is responsible and where complicity ends and where responsibility starts. And I appreciated that conversation as well. But I don't think I can say anything else without spoilers. So I'm going to do a spoiler section. I honestly don't know how I'm going to rate this yet. Maybe once I've talked through my spoiler thoughts, I will have arranged my feelings better so I can tell you. So stick around for final thoughts on Mockingjay and my rating, as well as my final thoughts on the whole trilogy to wrap us up. But you can skip this spoiler section with the links in the description box, so do so if you so wish. These are going to include spoilers for the entire trilogy, although I will endeavor not to spoil anything specifically in the prequels. Okay, spoilers now. So even the first section of the second half was quite slow again, and I think I was struggling a bit with there just being so many new characters, and I didn't know who they were. And it's not that I didn't care, but I kind of didn't care who all these people were. So many new names, so many new people that Katniss had maybe had a couple conversations with, and that's it. And I just thought, okay, sure. I'm not going to remember any of you. I don't think you're that important. And it turns out none of them were that important. So I think I was right. Obviously, I tried to follow who was who roughly so that I could make sure that I knew what was happening, but we probably could have done with a few fewer characters. It just felt a little excessive. And it also meant that we had a little bit less time to spend with characters that were carrying through the series. Like Haymitch was barely in this book. Would have loved more from him. Gale, honestly, I don't think I noticed in the first two books, but Gale got very little development, and I feel like it became very obvious in this book. He was very one-dimensional as a character. He was protective. He loved Katniss. He was jealous of Peeta. He's good at making snares. He doesn't have a lot going on, you know? And this book would have been a great time to get to know him better because Peeta wasn't around for the first half, and yet we didn't take that opportunity. Kind of annoying. Katniss was very stagnant for the first half. In the second half, I really appreciated how she developed because she sort of, I mean, to be fair, in the first half, she is dealing with a lot of trauma, and I think it was realistic. I do think that there were some aspects of her personality that regressed a bit or felt a bit stagnant that didn't feel necessarily like a conscious choice for her characterization and more felt like a little bit of lazy writing. Like if she's too dumb to know what someone is saying to her or what's happening, then it's more surprising to us when it happens because she didn't already catch it, or it gives us the chance to figure it out first and feel smart. Or sometimes it felt like it was just easier to write her a particular way without it necessarily making the most sense for where she should be at developmentally, you know? But alas, in the second half, I did feel she started to grow more. I think what was really interesting, annoying for sure, frustrating for sure, but really interesting, was Peeta coming back having been brainwashed to hate Katniss, to be terrified of her, to be suspicious of her, to think that she was a mutt sent to destroy them all and not even a real person, and how not only how hurt Katniss is by that, but also her realization of how much she took Peeta for granted, his kindness and his steadfastness and his unconditional love, and to lose that was so painful for her. There's a passage at the end of chapter 16. Peeta laughs again coldly, dismissively. Well, you're a piece of work, aren't you? Haymitch didn't protest when I walked out. Down the hall, through the beehive of compartments. Find a warm pipe to hide behind in a laundry room. It takes a long time before I get to the bottom of why I'm so upset. When I do, it's almost too mortifying to admit. All those months of taking it for granted that Peeta thought I was wonderful are over. Finally, he can see me for who I really am. Violent, distrustful, manipulative, deadly. And I hate him for it. And I love this for her because she's finally facing her flaws, and she has so many, as do most 17-year-olds, let alone 17-year-olds who have been forced to murder a bunch of people and watch a bunch of people be murdered and be brought into a rebellion and lost loved ones and seen whole sections of their world be razed to the ground. She's been through a lot. And even your average 17-year-old is likely to be impulsive or short-tempered or distrustful or indecisive or whatever it may be, judgmental. And she is all those things. And she's allowed to be. But I think she has spent so much time being revered by the people around her. Gale having this, puppy-eyed best friend love for her, even when she didn't realize he thought of her that way. Peeta having this, undying, unrequited love for her for so long and sort of making excuses for anything she does and always being there for her. Her mother and sister sort of seeing her as their savior in a way, and then the entire country seeing her as a victor and then as inspiration for the revolution, the Mockingjay. It would be understandable for anyone, let alone, again, a 17-year-old who has been deeply traumatized, to let that get to their head a little bit and to finally have Peeta so angry and so distrustful of her and so judgmental of her and sort of holding up a mirror to some of the things she's done and said and what they're really like. This came right after them talking about the love triangle situation and saying, and it was okay with both of us, you kissing the other, he asks. No, it wasn't okay with either of you, but I wasn't asking your permission, I tell him. And that's when Peeta comes back saying, well, you're a piece of work, aren't you? And that's fair. That's fair. Is it fair for her to be confused between them based on the very specific circumstances and the timing of this? Yes. Once she was back for months and months with both of them, could she have made a decision or decided to not kiss either of them until she could make a decision outside of public events when she felt she had no choice to protect her loved ones from being murdered? Yeah, she could have, but she didn't. I think it was really good to see her have that pushback and reckon with that and it make her really mad, but then also that grow into sadness and grief over losing Peeta and realizing she didn't appreciate him while she had him. And then this resolve to be a better person, basically. I think she really starts to grow from this point. She really starts to try to live her values more and be more aligned with herself. And I thought that was a really great shift for her character. And it wasn't linear. It wasn't, a constant improvement. It was still very messy, and she went through a lot of complicated emotions and difficult situations and, wavered. But I felt from that point, she really started to become an adult, and that was really cool to watch. I do think, as much as it was a great catalyst for Katniss and her growth as a character, I do think that evil brainwashed Peeta, was kind of like watching a mirror episode of Star Trek. If you're a Trekkie, a mirror episode is when all of your favorite lovable characters go into a mirror universe and become evil. So they all suddenly have a mustache or wear black leather gloves or skimpier versions of their outfit, and they're evil and bad. And there are always these fun, really campy, silly episodes, usually, where all the characters get to play villains, and they're normally the upstanding Starfleet officers. And that's kind of what it felt like for Peeta, because he's such a goody two-shoes. He's so pure and kind and generous. And then he comes back as evil Peeta, and he's a bad boy. He's, rough around the edges. And it was just so funny. It's like watching a teenager put on a bad boy act when they just don't have anything to back it up. I found it kind of entertaining, but I did appreciate it for what it did for Katniss in her growth. And I appreciated how it made their dynamic more equal, because before this point, he was so obsessed with Katniss that Katniss choosing him would have felt almost like she was choosing someone who saw her as a god, put her on a pedestal to the point of them not having this even partnership. Whereas him coming back hating her and her having to slowly remind him of their experiences together and win his trust back and, walk the walk and show in her actions how she cares about him. And that made them much more on an even playing field. And I think that was really good for their relationship. And I also think that made it make so much more sense that she chose Peeta in the end. And I did also appreciate that she chose Peeta, because Gale wasn't killed off. Gale didn't, they didn't have this huge fight. Gale didn't, he went to a different district, but, she could have gone to District 2 and begged him to be with her if she wanted to, and I'm sure he would have accepted. He was still an option for her, but she chose Peeta. And I appreciated that, because there's so little that Katniss got to choose in this series. And I think that's something that this is exploring as well. And it's so much more present, I think, in Mockingjay, to watch how she went from being a pawn in President Snow's game, literally in the Hunger Games, and then she became a pawn for him as a victor and had to play the exact part that he told her to play, had to quell the rebellion, had to be in love with Peeta. And when she's finally pulled out of that system and thinks that maybe now she can be free to just be herself again, she is then immediately made a pawn for the revolution. She is made a piece in the revolution's game. You have to be this figurehead. You are going to be the symbolic face of the revolution while not actually having any true power, and expecting her to be easy to manipulate because she's a 17-year-old girl who's been through all this trauma, and that she'll just do whatever they tell her to do. And for a while she does. But again, as she goes through this journey of growing into adulthood and realizing who she is and figuring out what she really values, she starts to come into her own and make decisions for herself and frees herself finally from being a pawn in someone else's game, removes herself from the board by killing President Coin. And I loved that moment, because I did not remember it. Like I said, I didn't remember anything from this book at all, other than the fact that the rebellion was happening in this one. But the fact that she had the opportunity to murder President Snow, and that was the intended plan, that she was going to execute him, and instead she chose to kill President Coin, realizing that she was just as bad, if not worse, than President Snow, that she had learned all of his tricks and was using them shamelessly for her own ascension to power, that she didn't care about the death of innocents, that she didn't care about the people who were oppressed by the system. She only cared about her own ends and her wants and needs. And that was the action that finally allowed Katniss to be free. And I loved that. I loved that she made that choice for herself. She had a lot of reason to hate President Snow and want to kill him. She didn't know he would die of his own accord 5 seconds later. That just was a, serendipitous bonus. But she chose to kill Coin instead, seeing what Panem could become under her rule with her iron fist, and also to choose herself and to free herself, and as retribution for Prim. Because in the lead up to that, when they're discussing the idea of how holding one final Hunger Games, I was losing it. I was freaking out reading it. I left quite the extensive notes because I was getting real mad. When Katniss voted yes to doing another Hunger Games with the children of those in power or the descendants of those in power. One final Hunger Games to show that the Capitol citizens are being punished for everything they've done. I truly thought she'd lost it because, again, I didn't remember how this went. I was so pissed off. And then for Haymitch to vote with her, I was losing it. I was so mad. I was like, what is happening here? How is this justice? What do you mean? This is horrific. How could you ever condone this? Have we learned nothing? And then she kills President Coin. And I'm like, oh, she was just lulling her into a false sense of security, getting her to think that she's on her side and still with her and then taking her out. Okay. That's fine. But I was getting so angry because I just thought, we've learned nothing. I thought Katniss was growing and changing, but I guess not. I'm so upset. But I appreciated that. I appreciated the clear acknowledgement. I mean, she says, I think, or she's thinking to herself, I no longer feel any allegiance to these monsters called human beings, despite being one myself. I think that PETA was on to something about us destroying one another and letting some decent species take over, because something is significantly wrong with a creature that sacrifices its children's lives to settle its differences. You can spin it any way you like. Snow thought the Hunger Games were an efficient means of control. Coin thought the parachutes would expedite the war. But in the end, who does it benefit? No one. The truth is, it benefits no one to live in a world where these things happen. And, exactly. I'm glad she got to that point because I truly thought I was going to have to go on an extremely long rant about how ridiculous it was that they would all agree to do another Hunger Games. Again, having learned nothing, and then having this conversation with Plutarch as she's going back to District 12. Are you preparing for another war, Plutarch? I asked. Oh, not now. Now we're in that sweet period where everyone agrees that our recent horrors should never be repeated, he says. But collective thinking is usually short-lived. We're fickle, stupid beings with poor memories and a great gift for self-destruction. Although who knows? Maybe this will be it, Katniss. The time it sticks. Maybe we are witnessing the evolution of the human race. Think about that. And, unlikely, because humans love to grasp for power and love to forget who the true enemy is, and love to start wars and conflicts, but one can hope. And I also really appreciated that she went back to District 12 to live and sort of separated. I mean, it wasn't totally her choice, but that she ultimately is separated from any important role in government and just gets to live for herself. And that Buttercup comes back because Prim has been murdered. So I didn't even touch on this yet. Prim and Finnick being murdered, those were the murders that made me really angry and at first had me raging about how those were senseless deaths and why are you doing this to me? And then the more I thought about it, I mean, I do think Finnick's death was very quick and wasn't mourned as much as I personally would have liked, even, from Katniss, who I feel they had gotten pretty close and bonded quite a bit in this book and helped each other through their trauma. And the idea that he is mentioned once or twice after that and that's it didn't feel like enough for me. I actually didn't realize he was dead when I read that passage the first time. I went back to reread it because I felt I missed something, and I had, and then it almost never came up again, and I thought that was weird. Prim's death was also a little vague for me. I also reread that passage because I didn't realize it was her at first. I mean, I think that probably both deaths could have been condensed into Prim's death to show what Collins was trying to show about the senselessness of war, death not discriminating. As Lin-Manuel Miranda said in Hamilton, death doesn't discriminate between the sinners and the saints. It takes and it takes and it takes. And we keep living anyway. My musical theater degree coming in clutch. But yeah, I think so much of what Collins is trying to do here is show war is bad and people die. And it's not always the people you want to die who die. Lots of people will die and lots of innocent people will die and lots of people you really like and care about will die. And it will feel senseless and pointless. And you will wonder why it was worth it in the first place and if it was worth it, and wonder if your methods were ethical, if the ends justify the means, on and on and on. And that's not an easy answer, and losing Finnick is heartbreaking, and losing Prim is the final straw for Katniss. Prim is what started all of this. Prim is the reason she was in the Hunger Games in the first place. Prim was the inciting incident, Prim being chosen as the tribute for District 12, and Prim's death is the inciting incident for Katniss to finally free herself as a pawn. She became a pawn, not intentionally. It wasn't Prim's fault, but because of Prim, because she wanted to save Prim, she became a pawn in these games. And when Prim was killed, it was finally setting her free and removing the fear of her sister being killed and that form of control over her, allowing her to finally choose for herself, kill Coin, extricate herself from the games. Finally. And that's heartbreaking and it's devastating. Prim was only 14, but I think it serves both the narrative arc, Katniss's character arc, the themes that are being explored on so many levels, and I don't think it's pointless or unnecessary or just to make you, manipulative to the reader to make you feel sad. Obviously, I'm sure Collins knew people would feel sad about it, but I think it kind of had to happen on some level. Finnick didn't necessarily need to die, but I think it does fit into the themes. I think it does help to demonstrate what Collins was trying to show. And I also appreciated for Katniss that she finally got over her complete ridiculous hatred of Buttercup, the adorable cat. When Buttercup comes searching for Prim all the way from District 13 and is clearly distressed, she finally lets Buttercup in. She finally allows Buttercup to be in her life without threatening her life. She finally accepts Buttercup. They support each other through their grief of losing Prim. And finally, because truly her constant, unnecessary, over-the-top hatred of this cat was quite upsetting to me personally. I also found the whole ending really emotional. I loved that Peeta came back and was planting primroses for Prim. I loved that they slowly grew into a genuine, equal relationship. I loved how the final chapter ended. On the night, I feel that thing again, the hunger that overtook me on the beach. I know this would have happened anyway, that what I need to survive is not Gale's fire, kindled with rage and hatred. I have plenty of fire myself. What I need is the dandelion in the spring, the bright yellow that means rebirth instead of destruction, the promise that life can go on no matter how bad our losses, that it can be good again, and only Peeta can give me that. So after, when he whispers, "You love me," real or not real, I tell him, real. And that clearly makes me very emotional. I think that is the perfect way to conclude this love triangle. I think people who say that either she didn't actually get to choose in the end are not paying attention, and people who are mad that she chose Peeta are also not paying attention. Because if it hadn't ended this way, it would have been worse, okay? Regardless of whether you would have been more attracted to Gale or gotten along better with his personality. For Katniss, this is the pairing that makes sense. This isn't, you can do whatever you want, but self-inserting into books makes it harder to understand what the author is trying to do with characters and with plots and with relationships, because they are not writing about you. They don't know you. They're writing a character. And just because you wouldn't do something doesn't mean the character wouldn't do something, right? Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. I think that was beautiful. I think that is a great resolution, conclusion for their relationship. I think it makes so much sense. I thought the epilogue was really lovely and beautiful, sort of touching on how they have survived all of this, how they have grown their life together, what they're focusing on. There were a couple quotes I really loved in the second half, so let me quickly find them. The ones I haven't read already, at least. Oh yeah, there was this section after Prim's death. "My mother buries her grief in her work. Having no work, grief buries me." And then also, "Closing my eyes doesn't help. Fire burns brighter in the darkness." Also, Finnick and Annie's wedding was beautiful. I cried. It was so beautiful. And then Finnick dying after made me really upset because Annie and Finnick deserve to be happy together, and I'm mad that they don't get to be happy together. But again, war does that. It ruins people's lives. And sometimes it feels necessary because you are living in this horrifically oppressive system, and rebellion can lead to a better life for everyone, but that doesn't mean that it's easy and that the war to get there isn't extremely painful for the actual individual people who are involved and who lose their lives or lose loved ones to it, right? But I think that's it for spoilers, so that I don't talk for a million years. I say that, I've already talked for over an hour, so I need to cut myself off. I will say, this series as a whole is so much about trauma and loss and grief and the resilience that allows you to pull through all of that even when it feels absolutely impossible. A series about believing in your values and sticking up for what you believe in even when it feels impossible, even when you feel that you have no power to do so. Choosing compassion and remembering who the real enemy is and choosing love, as cliche as that may sound. And I thought it was very well done. In talking more about it, I do think the pacing was a little uneven here. There were a couple things I didn't love about, especially the first half of this, but I did quite like this as well. I think my impulse is to say 4, but I do think as an entire trilogy, as an ending to the trilogy, this does a lot right. I think it is a very fitting end to the trilogy. I think it ties up character arcs and thematic explorations and plot arcs very well. I do think it had some wasted potential on some of the characters. I do think it wasted a little bit of time in the beginning. I do think the pacing was a little uneven, just like with Catching Fire. And with Catching Fire, that resulted in a 4-star. I'm gonna say 4.5, even though I don't really give half stars. And I'm gonna round it up to 5 for now. I might change my mind in the future, but I think that's fair because it isn't just a standalone book. It is a book in and of itself, but it's also the conclusion of the trilogy. So anyway, I think I'm gonna say that 5 stars for The Hunger Games, 4 stars for Catching Fire, and 5 stars for Mockingjay, and 5 stars for the trilogy as a whole. And that makes it pretty obvious, I guess, that I really enjoyed rereading this, and I felt it was worth rereading it. There were so many things that I did not remember at all that absolutely shocked me, and I couldn't believe that I didn't remember them. To be fair, it's almost been 20 years, and I barely remember what I did last week, so maybe I shouldn't be shocked. But some of the things that happened feels like they should have been burned into my brain forever. I'm really glad I reread this. I'm glad so many of you were yelling at me in the comments to reread it. You were right, definitely. Now, in terms of the prequels, obviously I read them before reading these, so that is its own unique experience. Maybe I'll re-listen to the audiobooks over the next couple weeks and just see how my opinion changes. If I do end up doing that, I'll leave a comment on my own video giving you an update. But I think having read the prequels before rereading the trilogy, they added a lot of really useful context and really deepened some of the more brief passages, some of the barely there details, some of the little interactions or one-off characters who were given more of a spotlight in the prequels. I think knowing more about those characters and having more context for those 2 past Quarter Quells added a lot to this trilogy as a whole and to many of the moments and characters. I think Haymitch is very, very much improved by the prequel because you get so much more context for who he is and how he became the person he is. I think President Snow gets way more context in his prequel, understandably, and I think that that makes it easier to understand him and also makes it easier to hate him too, in a way. You know, it adds complexity to him as a character. He's not just a one-dimensional villain, but it also makes it, you hate him even more because you realize that he had a choice to be different and he didn't choose that, because he's the worst. Also, I feel like like I said, there are lots of one-off characters and little moments that were expanded upon in the prequels, and I thought that added a lot. I think it adds a lot more history and depth to Katniss's mother, who is a character who I felt was very hard done by this trilogy. Katniss was really hard on her mom, and I felt it was understandable on one level. I already talked about it. I don't need to rehash it, but I also felt it was a little excessive. And I liked knowing much more about the context of where she came from and some of her experiences and other things that might have led to who she turned out to be and how she might have reacted to even more grief and trauma in her life. From this context, having read them first before my reread, I still think the prequels are great. I still think they both deserve 5 stars. If I reread them now, maybe my opinion will change, but I think that they did a really good job of expanding upon the world, picking up little threads from the trilogy and expanding upon them in a way that feels additive and not like fan service. I think that's a critique I saw a lot, that they either were rewriting history or changing things significantly, which didn't feel like it was the case to me, but maybe I would feel that if I reread them. Everything felt pretty consistent with how characters were portrayed and events were portrayed in the original trilogy, but also they didn't really feel fan servicey to me necessarily. I think they added a lot of complexity and they did what Collins has done a very good job of in this trilogy as well, which is writing characters that you care about who are also very messy and very much in the gray area and very complicated and have lots of flaws and make decisions that you struggle to agree with even if you understand why they made those choices. And I think that that is more interesting. And I liked the prequels a lot. I also really liked rereading the original trilogy. And I think that's where I'm going to end this. Those are my thoughts. 5 stars, 4 stars, 5 stars. 5 stars for both of the prequels is where I'm currently sitting. Let me know your thoughts on the prequels, on the original trilogy. What were your ratings for all 5 books? I would love to know. Should I watch the movies next? I've seen at least the first 2 movies. Is there a 3rd movie? There must be. Did I watch it? I'm not sure. I would have already been in college at that point. I might not have seen it at the end of the day. I have not seen Songbirds and Snakes movie, and I think Sunrise on the Reaping is coming out this year. Is that right? So let me know if I should watch the movies. Should I just watch them all and then make a video talking about it? Should I do watch-alongs for my patrons and channel members as like a live stream and react live? Let me know in the comments. Share your thoughts on these books. Like I said, tell me your ratings of all 5. Tell me what you thought of them. Do you agree or disagree on the 5 million things I said in this video? This is probably so long. Thank you for bullying me into reading these. I had a great time. And by great time, I mean I cried a lot and felt angry and sad and a lot of dread and despair, but in a good way, you know? Thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you for still being here. If you made it all the way to the end and you haven't already left a comment on one of the million things I said, leave an emoji that represents the Hunger Games to you in the comments so I know you made it all the way to the end and you're a real one. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you. Like this video if you liked it. Subscribe if you haven't already. Consider joining me on Patreon or as a channel member if you're interested in participating in watch-alongs of all the Hunger Games movies. I could make that happen. And thank you again so much to Ana Luisa for sponsoring this video. I know you'll love them as much as I do, so check them out with a link in my description box or use this QR code to shop Ana Luisa today for all of your daily wear pieces. They're amazing. Thank you again to Ana Luisa for sponsoring this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you really soon in my next one. Bye, friends.